Good morning, everybody. My name is Sherry Schwartz-Maltz, and I am the Media Relations and Issues Manager for the TDSB. I'm also the very proud chair of the TDSB's Jewish Heritage Committee. And thank you, everybody, for joining us for this special presentation. I want to welcome everyone, all our wonderful students and teachers who are watching online, and I hope there's a lot of them. I want to welcome Minister of Education, Stephen Lecce. I'm not sure where you are, but in the back. Okay. I want to welcome MPP Stan Cho, who's also with us today. Trustees King, Trustee Laskin, Director Russell Rollins, who's here with us today. Other senior staff, our amazing community partners. There's lots of representatives here today from our community partners, and all the grade 8 students and staff from what I think is one of the best schools in the TDSB, Fern Avenue Public School. Yay! So before we continue, I'd like to acknowledge the land, and we have 2 students here from Fern who will be doing the land acknowledgement. If you guys can come up, please.
We acknowledge we are hosted on the lands of the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat. We also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples.
Nous reconnaissons que nous sommes acquis sur les terres des Mississaugas, des Anishinaabe, de la Confédération Haudenosaunee et du Wendat. Nous voulons également reconnaître la pérennité de la présence des Premières Nations, des Métis et des Inuits.
So today is International Holocaust Remembrance Day, which is observed every January 27th. The Holocaust, which happened between 1933 and 1945, was the state-sponsored persecution and murder of 6 million European Jews by the Nazi German regime and its allies and collaborators. International Holocaust Remembrance Day marks the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, which was the largest of the Nazi death camps. It's a time for all of us to think about the lessons of the Holocaust, what does it teach us, and going forward for each of us to be aware of and committed to everyone's human rights. It is my very great pleasure to introduce you today to Mr. Pinchas Gutter, who is a Holocaust survivor. Pinchas was born to a Jewish family, a Jewish religious family in Poland in 1932, which makes him 91 years young, about, right? Not yet. When the Nazis invaded Poland in 1939, Pinchas and his twin sister Sabina and the family used a false Christian identity to escape their small city to Warsaw, the capital of Poland. They were made to live in an area called the Warsaw Ghetto, which is where the Nazis made all the Jews live. There was an uprising. The conditions were so horrible in the ghetto. There was an uprising. Pinchas's family hid in a bunker, but they were discovered, crammed into a train, and taken to the Majdanek concentration camp. This was the last time Pinchas saw his parents or his twin sister, who were murdered there. He was then transferred to a series of forced labor camps and concentration camps. And please remember, he was only 12 years old, maybe even younger, 11, 12 years old.
I was 11 when I became a slave laborer. But I told them that I was 16 because my father said to me, I had no idea why at the time, why he told me that when they were separating, men from women, deciding who they're going to, I didn't know that at the time. I didn't know at the time exactly what was happening because we didn't arrive in Treblinka, which was the place of where they're murdering everybody. So my father must have known there was a selection, and I was a head taller than my twin sister. so I could pass. So he took me with the man, and he said, say that you're 5 years older. And,
That probably saved your life.
and that what saved my life,
Yes.
because I was chosen to be a slave laborer.
Pinchas was eventually, the last place he was in Czechoslovakia, which is now called the Czech Republic, in a place called Theresienstadt Ghetto, where he was liberated by the Red Army, part of the Allied forces, in May 1945. After the war, he lived in the United Kingdom, Israel, and South Africa before immigrating to Canada in 1985. Pinchas and his wife have 3 children and 3 grandchildren. In 2020, we at the TDSB hosted for our high school students The Last Goodbye, which is an award-winning virtual reality film that features Pinchas, who returns to Majdanek, where he was a prisoner. Unfortunately, the pandemic shut us down, but we really hope that one day we can bring the film back for all our students. So Pinchas, there's so much to talk about, and we have such limited time today, but I hope you'll share with us some of your insights and thoughts. And I'm just going to ask you 1 or 2 questions, if that's okay.
Okay.
So this is Pinchas's book, everybody. I think we have a slide of the book. So we see on the front cover a young girl with a long braid. Who is she?
This is a very painful story for me. This is my twin sister. At least that is the plait that she, the braid that I remember. Because when we arrived in Majdanek, the place where my father, mother, and sister were murdered, she was separated from my mother, and she was pushed toward the children. I was watching my mother, and suddenly she must have seen her also. So she started running away from the children, and she ran towards my mother. And I was watching that braid that I kind of, moved in the wind. And when she came, she hugged my mother, so I saw her from the back. And since that time, for 11 years, we were inseparable. And I have a photographic memory, and I remember everything from when I was an infant, crawling under the table when my father was saying his prayers in the morning. But I can't remember anything about my sister except that braid. My brain did something to this day. When I think of Sabina, her name was Sabina, and so when I told them the story and Memories in Focus was published, they decided to put that. That is actually the poster on the Tribeca Festival when they showed the virtual reality for the first time, and I was there, and I think the publisher decided to ask the people who made the virtual reality to be able to put that the image on the front. So that is basically the braid that I remember and nothing else.
Pinchas, during the Holocaust, you were in many forced labor and concentration camps. I think it was 6. I think from my memory it was 6. What was it that got you through it? I mean, you were a kid. What got you through it?
It's a very good question, because it's impossible to actually understand, and I am one person who went through it. I still don't understand, is that at the age of 11, supposedly being 16, I was first for 3 months in a death camp, Majdanek. I was then pushed into a death factory because somebody who survived that camp after the war, he wrote a book and he called it In the Factories of Death, because we were working with all kinds of different chemicals and acids. And the Nazis, the Germans, the people that would come, the Christian people that would come from the villages and towns to work in these factories, all wear protective clothing, just like firemen do, with masks. We were in rags. We had no protective clothing. And those acids, particularly one particular, which I used to know, in Polish, called pikrina. And after the war, I felt, when I went to England, I asked them, what is this pikrina? And it is picric acid. And and if you don't wear protective clothing, it goes through your body, and it actually makes you yellow. And when I arrived at that camp, and I suddenly saw people looking like canaries, their hair was yellow, their clothes was yellow, their faces was yellow, and they didn't last longer than 3 months because it affected their lungs, their kidneys, and their heart, and they would swell up. A cousin of mine who arrived after me at this particular camp, and I was at his wedding in 1938 as a youngster in Łódź. He didn't last longer than 3 months. His name was Michael. He had a wife who was in the Lodz ghetto. He had a child. Both of them were murdered in the death camp. And he arrived as a slave laborer, and he worked with it, with his acids, and he died within 3 months. He swelled up.
So how did you survive?
Well, when I was in Majdanek, one of the things, and don't ask me how I perceived and how I came to this, I made myself invisible in the sense that I tried to keep out of the way, and I didn't think in terms of being there. I kind of felt that I was in a cocoon, in a kind of chrysalis, which, a butterfly comes out, and I was hoping that one of these days I will come out as a lively butterfly. But the important thing was to make yourself invisible. So, for example, we had a garden in front of the barrack where we were working. So after we were counting, and it took sometimes an hour or two or more, and they made us do all kinds of exercises, and they punished us, and they beat us, I would go and lie down in that little garden with my backside on top, and any soldier or any guard that would come back and would say, "Was machst du hier? What are you doing here?" And I said, the block ältester, the block in charge of the block, told me that I must schoon machen, which means make nice, pull out the weeds. And this is what I tried to do. A couple of times, of course, I was taken to hard labor and running with stones backwards and forwards and beaten and so forth and so on. But most of the time, I tried to do that. And when I came to Skarżysko, the so-called working camp, the internal administration was Jewish, and they were Jewish policemen and Jewish administrators. And I was assigned to a policeman by the name of Katz. And he asked me, "Where are you from? And what is your name?" He asked everybody assigned when we arrived there. And I said, "My name is Gutter." "Oh," he says, "I am from Lodz. I know your family very well." They were privileged in the sense they could have their wives and even children and parents, because they were cooperators, collaborators. I don't want to judge them. You can't. And he said, "Look, I will try and help you." And because his work was on the Strzelnica, which is on the firing range, which is quite dangerous, but it was outside. So I didn't work with the acids. So that's number one. Number two, his wife was dying of TB, sick, lying in the police barrack. So he said, "When you come back from work, we work 12 hours day, 12 hours night. You must look after her." And I became her nurse. I washed her, I cleaned her, I tried to feed her a little bit, and she lasted for about 6-7 months. So when coming back from work, I became a nurse, like in a hospital.
So it sounds like it was a series of events that in a way worked in your favor, luck, but I think there was courage involved as well. And so can you talk a little bit about courage?
About?
What does courage? It sounds like there was courage involved as well. Talk a little bit about courage.
Well, there was, I always believed that my father, who became like a giant, and he was a modest man before the war, a winemaker, a master winemaker, I always kind of looked to him for being my guardian angel. But the same thing, I am a religious Jew, so I also believe that providence kept me, the faith kept me. It wasn't just, you know, it's a combination of many things. You can't say it was luck, it was this, it was that. It obviously was a lot of many things that managed for you to survive. And fortunately, for me, I did. And unfortunately, cats did not survive, because the night that we were, as a matter of fact, I have to tell you the story. I was there for a year, and the reason why I lasted a year is, first of all, because he looked after me. I had typhoid. Another Jewish policeman saved me instead of, you know, when you were sick, they took you to the forest and shot you, because if you weren't arbeitsfähig, if you couldn't work, you weren't good for the Nazis. So they would kill you. At the end of July of 1944, the Russians were coming closer to this factory. We could hear the guns. So one day, we came back from work, and we were told to go in front of the commander. He was sitting in a window, and give your name. So we gave our name, everybody, and he made a tick. The next morning, to cut the story short, we haven't got the time, the next morning, he started calling out names, and he said something which they always try to fool you, is that people that are being called out their names, they are going to go with rail trucks to the next camp. But those that are not called out by name, they are going to have to walk to the next camp. But we immediately, within minutes, we knew, for some reason which I'm not going to go into, that this is a selection of people. I was in rags, I had no shoes, I had paper with wire on my feet. And then, of course, when we realized, when he shot the first two people, we started running. But we were surrounded with barbed wire, electric barbed wire. So where can you run? Well, the barracks were built on stilts. So I went and burrowed myself like an animal to hide. As soon as everybody started running, the guards, the SS, the guards, everybody with their machine guns and everything started, the Jewish police, they started, you know, giving us, you know, because nobody was going to answer the name. Before, we did answer the name. So he took me to the police barrack. Cats found me. He said, look, if they find you, they're going to shoot you. So let me help you. He took me to the police barrack, took all my rags off, gave me proper shoes, proper underwear, proper shirt. I looked like a human being, a jacket, shoes, high boots. And he rubbed, his wife had died by that time. He rubbed into my cheeks, you know, leftover lipstick, red lipstick, to make me look healthy. And he gave me a nice hat. And he said, go out. Now Schultz, the commander, he's going to go from row to row, and nobody's going to answer the name. So he's going to pull out. He's got, let's say, 400 or 500 people to shoot. So he's going to choose those that he wants to shoot. And that's what happened. And he came up to me, looked at me, and I was sure that he recognized me when I gave my name. But unfortunately, next to me stood my best friend, Jacob, and he was in rags like I was before, and he pulled him out without looking. And for years and years and years, I grieved that friend. He was 4 or 5 years older than me. And, you know, you had to have a friend and I was a child. I was really innocent. And he helped me a lot in helping me understand things.
It's a really powerful story. Wow. I think that some of you guys I think we're going to ask one of you guys, does anybody have a question here? From Fern. Is there a question? Yeah? Do you want to ask a question?
If you could speak to your family, what would you say to them?
I didn't
Okay.
hear that.
I'll
It was
repeat
too
that.
far
Thank
away.
you. Thank you. What he asked was, which is a great question, is if you could speak to your family, what would you say to them?
The family that I've got now.
You could, his sister and his parents. If you could speak to your sister and your parents, what would you say to them?
Well, I am a believer, in God, and I believe in an afterlife. So I believe that most of the time they know what's happening. And, the wonderful thing is that I have got a new family, and they know that I've got a new family. And I've also got great-grandchildren now. I've got two little boys, Jack and Henry, who are, the one is 2 years old and the other one is now 7 months old. And they are my great-grandchildren. My grandson, had children. But I don't believe that you can actually communicate with people that passed away and are either in paradise or wherever their spirit is floating around. I communicate with them through me. In other words, I talk to myself and I remember everything that they did. In other words, I keep their memory, and everything that my parents did when I was sick with pneumonia before the war, the way she walked around, the prayers that she said continuously, the way I was put into the parents' bedroom in my mother's bed, and I was sick for about 6 weeks. Now all these things go through my mind. So to talk to them, I think would be, how do you say, an avira? A sin, because I would be waking up spirits that are in the afterlife, and I don't believe in our religion, in the Jewish religion, that you should pray. You should remember. You should pray for them every year at special days. I say special prayers for the souls of my father, mother, sister, and all the other members of my family that I can remember their names, but I would not want to communicate with them.
We have another question. Yes, way back there. Not sure if he's going to, do you want to tell me the question? What do you consider? So she asked a really interesting question. She's asking about home, the idea of home. Home. What do you consider your home to be after the war?
I started working at the age of 14, and I was taken after the war to England, and I started working as an apprentice motor mechanic at Ford in Dagenham, because I didn't want to be in the orphanage and I didn't want to depend on charity. I wanted to be independent, and I was 14 years old. And the reason why I went to all these different countries is because I needed to find work. I got married, I had a child, so wherever there's a possibility to find work. But to be quite honest, I came to Canada by chance. I visited in 1984, I visited my late brother-in-law who came here in the 60s. He was a academic, and he had a wife and 2 children, and I came to visit them. And when I arrived and walked along the waterfront, which wasn't built up in those days, somehow in the subway, in the metro, in wherever I went in, I felt a freedom. I felt that this is a place which I would like to make my home. And I went back to South Africa, which I never liked there, and I had no choice because my wife was born in South Africa and she was South African. And I always tried not to go back to South Africa. That's why I went to Paris, I went to Sao Paulo in Brazil, and I went all over the place to find work, but not to go. Eventually, her mother and father, when we had already a child, they insisted, and she became pregnant again, that we should come home. So for me, South Africa was never home. Canada became my home. Canada, with all its freedoms, with all its populations from different countries and everywhere else, I felt when I came here in 1984, I actually started breathing in, and I could feel that every breath that I got was the breath of freedom. And I decided, as soon as I came back, that I'm going to apply to come to Canada. And since then, I've been a very happy person living here. You know, I worked a little bit, and then I retired, and I've been involved in community work. And it's just a wonderful country. Canada is a wonderful country, and we should guard it. I know we in our anthem we say guarding, but we should really guard it.
I think that was an incredible answer, and it's a good segue to something I want to ask you. I hear sometimes from kids, from adults, that history is boring. Why do we have to learn about history? Why do you think history matters?
Well, I would like to read you a quote, which I remember, but I never ever dare to not read it when I've written it down. Because this quote comes from the Baal Shem Tov, the man of the good name, who in 1760 approximately founded what we call today Hasidim. A Hasid is a person who is a very religious person. And some of you, if you go down Bathurst, you have seen them. They wear black hats, they have, you know, side locks, and they wear slightly different clothes, winter and summer, but they are very pious people. And the word Hasid in Hebrew comes from a source which also means chesed. And chesed means to do good deeds and to be a good person. And it also means charity. So this is, to me, this has been my mantra. And because of my age, I forgot what you asked me.
We're talking about, why does history matter? Why do we need to learn about history?
And then now I'm going to read you what he actually said. The remembrance is the secret of redemption. Forgetting leads to exile. That was the words, and one can interpret them in many, many ways. And I think history is very important, and the reason why history is so important, because by learning what happened, we can see also what is happening at the moment. Lots of bad things are happening at the moment. We can try, each and every one, do just a tiny little bit to make the future a better place. I've said it many times, you know, you are the young people. You are the future of Canada, of the world maybe. You can be anything you want to be. You can be presidents, ministers, you know, you can be great scientists, but please remember that try a little bit. Each person's each person that does a little bit adds to making the world a much better place to live in. And that's why history is so important, that we should know and learn from the past.
Those are really beautiful words, amazing observations. Going back to the Holocaust, what do you think when I think about why we teach it and why we discuss it and why it's so important to learn about it? What are some of the lessons specific to the Holocaust that we can learn from?
Well, I've said it many times, but I'm going to say it again. And I'm going to say it because you haven't heard it. The importance of the lessons of any iniquity, not just the Holocaust. There were many, many iniquities, even after the Second World War, and we thought never again this should happen. Lots of things are happening. I mean, what is happening at the moment? The Ukrainian people are being destroyed for a very selfish reason of a man called Putin. And it breaks your heart to watch the scenes of people suffering. So, what I would like to do is give you a present. And the present that I want to give you is as follows. Do you know the Olympic Games? Does everybody know the Olympic Games? Do you know the Olympic torch? It goes around the whole world. It goes from country to country. And what it does, it's got one flame, and that flame says that the athletes, the people that are competing at the Olympics should compete in a nice way. They should not be angry. They should create a world of goodwill. And the Olympics should be a world as a kind of a flag to the world of goodwill amongst these athletes. I have a torch, and my torch has got many flames. And that torch, I will give you just the first five flames, which I think are the most important. And my torch carries the following: no racial discrimination, no religious discrimination, no homophobia, no xenophobia, and above all, no hatred, no hate. Hate is vicious, it's pernicious, it creates in people wanting to be vengeful, and it must be, please take it away from your hearts. So I'm giving you these torches. Each and every one of you has now got a little bit of me, but you also have my torch. I'm giving it to you as a present. And I want you to hand it over to your families, to your friends, to everybody that you can see, and tell them, this is the torch that we want to light up the world. You know, light. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, they talk about the sons of light and the sons of darkness. Now we want to be the sons of light, because light is actually so precious. And let me tell you something, in the Old Testament, I don't know how many of you know the Old Testament, but in the creation of the world, on the first day, God created light. But subsequently, on the third or fourth day, I don't remember exactly, he created the sun and the moon. So what was this light that he created on the first day? Why did he create that light in the first day? And what was it all about? But our sages and our commentators that kind of really thought very strongly about it, they came to the conclusion that this was a light of spirituality. This was a light given to each person of his spirit. It was a spiritual light of us who were created in God's image to be good people.
Beautiful. think we have time for maybe one more question from Fern. Sweetie.
My question was, going back to your last point, what do you think we can do to fight against hatred, racism, and anti-Semitism today?
So she wants to know, she wants to know about some practical things we can do, we can do to fight racism and anti-Semitism today. Did I miss one? And hatred today. What practical things what can they do?
A very simple thing, really as simple as possible. All you have to do is accept people as they are. Everyone. Because we were all created in the image of God. We actually, worship the same God. We do it through different signs and scenes. There's the cross, there's the Star of David, there is the Buddha. There's all kinds of different images that we kind of use as a help to be able to. But you must try and accept every person. It doesn't matter what their religion is. It doesn't matter what their color is. It doesn't matter where they come from. It doesn't matter what kind of speech they have. Remember, we are all the same. Accept them. Not tolerate them only. Tolerance is already a subjective thing. It means that you're making a decision whether to tolerate somebody or not. You have to accept them. And if you accept everybody, then this is going to create a much better world.
Beautiful answer. Do we have any other questions? Yes. Ooh. Question back here. Not sure he'll hear it, but.
When you first came to Canada, did you always feel safe, or were you scared that something was going to happen to you again?
When you first came to Canada, you talked about coming to Canada. When you first came to Canada, when you first came here, did you always feel safe?
I felt very safe when I arrived in Canada, and I must say I'm a bit concerned. Yesterday, I had the opportunity of meeting the chief of Toronto Police at another venue. And when he came and thanked me and shook my hands, I asked him one thing. I said, please keep us safe, because at the moment, there are things going on, maybe because of COVID and others, but Canada, I still feel very safe here. And the only thing is we must continue to do our bit to keep everybody safe. And I think it's up to us to make this place as safe as it was in 1985 when I arrived here.
We're coming down to our last question. Does anybody else here have a question? No? Well, I want to take this opportunity on behalf of the TDSB, on behalf of the students and the staff that are here today, to thank you. It was an honor to meet you. Just before we leave, is there anything else you want our young people to know? Just some final thoughts.
I want them to wish everything of the best. I want them to have safety, health, and to grow up and try and make the world a better place. And I can tell you, every little bit helps. It doesn't matter. When you see somebody that needs help, just give it to them. Don't avoid, people. Don't become a bystander. That's the worst thing that you become as a bystander. You always think that somebody else is going to do the help. If somebody needs help, help them, because that's the way that the world will continue and be a better place for all of us, and we will have a better life. Thank you. And thank you very much for being here and listening to me, and shalom.
I think you were telling me before there is an audio book available of your memoir for a limited time.
For the next 2 weeks, if you go to, I can't remember now, I should have actually brought it with me. If you go online, you can actually get the audiobook of this, which I actually read the whole book. And so it's my voice that you hear, and you can actually go online and look for it. It's actually one of the, sorry, I really forgot the name of the publisher.
Azrieli.
Yeah, but if you go to Azrieli, but it's being published by a very well-known publishing house. Yeah. So if you can actually download it in the next 2 weeks until the 6th of February, free of charge. It won't cost you anything.
And it's your voice.
Penguin. Yeah, it's Penguin. So if you go into their website, Penguin, they will direct you, and there are four books that mean I was the first one who read my book, and there are a couple of more, and you can get them all by downloading them free of charge. It won't cost you anything.
So on behalf of the TDSB, on behalf of our students and our staff, it was a real honor to meet you today. Thank you so much. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.